Greetings, friends, and welcome to episode 10 of the Rob Breakenridge Show, coming to you via our Substack page, which you can find at robbreakenridge.ca, and all your friendly neighborhood podcast platforms. You can also check out our YouTube channel at Rob Breakenridge Show. Lots to get to on this episode. Coming up in a bit, a closer look at the debate around coal policy in Alberta and the concerns around coal development on the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains. Specifically, it's the Grassy Mountain Project, which now has the green light, that's raising a lot of concern, especially when it comes to possible watershed impacts. There was a pretty packed and raucous town hall meeting earlier this month in southern Alberta, where the premier and 3 cabinet ministers heard quite an earful from worried and angry residents. Alberta country singer and songwriter Corb Lund has found himself at the center of this debate, was in attendance at that town hall meeting. We'll have that conversation with Corb Lund coming up a little bit later on in the show. Of course, the G7 Leaders Summit in Kananaskis is now wrapped up, an eventful summit to be sure, and also quite a showcase for Canada and for such a beautiful part of Alberta. A really cool story from the summit to share with you later on in the show. Graham Sherman, who owns Tool Shed Beer and Barbecue in Calgary, had the opportunity to be in Kananaskis and cook and serve barbecue to all of these world leaders. He's got quite a tale to tell. We'll chat with Graham later on in this episode. But first, new conflict in the Middle East very much loomed large over that G7 Leaders Summit, and it's still very unclear at this point where things are headed between Israel and Iran and whether the U.S. might still enter the fray. As Israel continues to target Iran's nuclear facilities and military structure and leadership, Iran has been lobbing ballistic missiles toward Israel with varying degrees of success. On Thursday, a number of Israeli cities were hit by Iranian missiles, including a hit on a hospital in the southern city of Beersheba. Upwards of 250 injuries were reported, a few of those said to be quite serious. Our next guest is in Israel. We caught up with him just prior to Thursday's latest missile volley from the Iranians. Adam Zivo is a commentator, a National Post columnist. He is also director of the Canadian Centre for Responsible Drug Policies. You can follow his post and his updates from Israel on X. He's at Zivo Adam, Z-I-V-O. Adam, so great to have you with us here. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me on the show. It's a pleasure to be here.
Just give us an overview, first of all. We'll get into the details. But just what have the last few days been like for you?
Well, I mean, the first day was quite anxiety-inducing because no one knew what to expect. But since then, there has been a sense of normalcy as people have simply followed protocols and gone to the bomb shelters as required. So essentially what happened is that the night of the attack, we were all woken up at 3 a.m. by an emergency alarm, which is basically akin to the Amber Alerts that they use in Canada. So everyone's phone started blaring really loudly, and the message told everyone that you should go near a bomb shelter in anticipation of an escalated threat, right? But you don't have to go into the bomb shelter right away. You just have to be near one. And so in the days preceding the attack, there were rumors that Israel was going to attack Iran. That was partially because the GPS in southern Israel wasn't working very effectively, so we knew there was some jamming there. The United States had evacuated its staff from its embassy in Iraq, and there was some reporting in the international media that this was going to happen. So when I got out of my building and I went to the stairwell, everyone was talking about how Israel had finally attacked Iran. So it was not a big surprise to everyone. We went into the bomb shelter in our basement and we waited for about an hour and nothing happened. And then we all went back to bed because that's how these things go. And so the next morning, I went around the streets. We had an emergency order in effect, so most of the businesses are shut. Public gatherings are banned. Educational activities are banned. And it was strange to see Tel Aviv so empty in the morning. Most people, the few pedestrians who I did see on the street were either getting supplies, so buying groceries to stock their shelters with, or they were carrying small luggage with them because they were relocating to smaller cities or towns that were less likely to be targets. So in the morning, we kind of expected some response from Iran, and Iran did send 100 drones, which, to be honest, was kind of pathetic. In Ukraine, they'd send over 400 drones at a time, multiple times a week, right? So this kind of response was not something that was too scary, and also drones are very slow, right? So they take 8 hours to get to Israel. They were all intercepted. And I remember interviewing some people who said they were actually a little bit surprised by how weak Iran's response was. And one person said, "Don't jinx it." And that night, though, that was when the real response came. And so what I'm going to say for context is that Iran wanted to send 1,000 missiles at Israel. That was its deterrence plan. But because the Israelis had managed to disable most of the launching infrastructure for these ballistic missiles, the Iranians were only able to send about 100 to 200 missiles or so, from my understanding. My numbers may be a little bit incorrect. I haven't slept much over the past few days. But the interception rate with the Iron Dome was very high, so 95%. And there were a few strikes that landed across Israel, I think one or two in the outskirts of Tel Aviv. But for the most part, people weren't particularly worried. So you go to the shelter, you get your warning saying go near the shelter. You have 10, 15 minutes. Then the air siren blares. You get your alert on your phone. You have 90 seconds to get in, and you're inside and you're safe. The people who have been killed or injured are mostly people who haven't followed protocol. And since then, we just follow protocol. We go into the shelters when we're asked to. We leave. Then we go to cafes, we go to restaurants, we go to the beach, and people live happily as they can, because to live normally in this scenario is an act of resistance against the Iranians.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I mean, look, Israel, of course, has been at war really for well over a year now, going back to the Hamas attacks from Hezbollah, attacks from the Houthis. But this is kind of on a different level or different scope. Has the mood changed at all from where it was, do you think, in recent days?
I would say so. Obviously, this is much more serious than the preceding attacks, although October 7th was much, much worse, right? We've only had a few dozen Israelis killed over the past few days, whereas in October 7th, there were, 1,100, 1,200 in one day. So what people who are listening to this really need to understand is that Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis are all Iran's proxies. So Iran funds these groups, gives them weapons to harass and attack Israel, which is why Israel's attack on Iran is not unprovoked, right? They are responding to Iran's consistent aggression and trying to defang Iran before Iran can develop the nuclear weapons that would allow Tehran and the mullahs to eradicate, all of the Jews in the area. But it's kind of like, if you can think of it like a video game, slowly leveling up. So Hamas is pretty weak. They control Gaza, but Gaza is impoverished. And they were able to do October 7th because they had the element of surprise. So they were taken care of. Then Hezbollah was a stronger threat. And, Israelis always viewed Hezbollah as being more of a significant threat than Hamas, which is why they weren't even looking down south. And Hezbollah was then neutered, right? At this point, they're militarily basically a non-entity. So now, the Houthis are kind of like a mosquito. They launch missiles every once in a while, but it's not that significant. But now we're at Iran, and Iran is the final boss of this video game, so to speak, if you think about regional politics for Israel. And the missiles that Iran is sending over are much stronger than anything that has been sent over by Hamas or Hezbollah. And to give an illustration of how that impacts everyday life, so for the past 2 years, when people hear the air raid alerts, they often ignore them, right? They used to. And they would maybe sleep through them, or they would go just to stay in the stairwell, not actually within the reinforced bomb shelter. And now that's changed because we see what these ballistic missiles can do. So people do go to the bomb shelters. Most of them go every single time, which is why Israelis right now are very tired, because when you have to go to the shelter 3 times a night, you only get 2-3 hours of sleep.
Yeah, ballistic missiles are another level altogether. You mentioned the Iron Dome, and that has proven quite effective. But some of these missiles have got through, and I guess it's a reminder of what Israel's trying to prevent in the future. If those missiles were armed with something else, right? That's a very real danger. But even now, these missiles getting through, that is quite a risk.
It is a risk, but once again, I really want to emphasize the fact that bomb shelters are ubiquitous. So Israeli building codes from the 80s or 90s now mandate that every building has to have a shelter. So it's only the older ones that don't have a shelter, and there are public shelters that you can run to. And I'm going to use an illustration of what it's like to be struck. So I believe 2 days ago, there was a strike right in the middle of downtown Tel Aviv, and it actually hit 850 meters away from where I was staying before I moved to Jerusalem. So it just like severely damaged, 3 buildings, 4 buildings. They're half collapsed. They're missing, one side of them. There's rubble all over there. And then, of course, the shockwave destroyed all the windows within a 100-meter radius. And then everything beyond that is kind of cracked. And you see all of these storefronts that are damaged. They're missing, maybe the frames of the windows have gone out. Actually, the first Airbnb that I was staying in Tel Aviv like 3 weeks ago, that was above the city's only dedicated gay bar and was actually right across the street from the impact site. So the gay bar is destroyed and my old Airbnb is destroyed. But I interviewed people who were staying in that area. I actually interviewed some Canadians, hockey players, who were there for Israeli hockey, which apparently exists. And, they were, 150 meters away, and they were in the shelter. And when the impact hit, they said, there was a huge shockwave. Everything felt like jello for a second. And the lights flickered on and off, but they were fine physically. And then they got out, and there was all this destruction everywhere. But because everyone had followed protocol and gone to the shelters, the fatalities were relatively low. And then within a few hours after the strike, many of these cafes that had been damaged just resumed operating again. Some of them just operated without windows temporarily. And all the glass that was shattered, because it was ubiquitous, you could just hear the crunching of shattered glass all the time. That was all swept away. And so many of these businesses are still closed because, the damage can be significant, but many of them have reopened. And people just resume living, right? So when you have a handful of attacks like this, society can absorb it. But I do want to emphasize that that's because of the Iron Dome. Because if you had 20, 30, 40 of these strikes, that would be an entirely different scenario. But thankfully, we can minimize this damage.
Is there a difference then in Jerusalem? Is there almost maybe more of a sense of safety in Jerusalem? Like the Iranians wouldn't be crazy enough to lob missiles, possibility that they could strike holy sites, or I don't know. Do you sense a difference between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem?
I wouldn't be able to say because I only arrived about 2 hours ago. And in those 2 hours did another podcast. So I've been on my laptop all this time. But what I can say is that, there's that hypothesis. So right now, Tehran seems to be primarily targeting Haifa and Tel Aviv. And of course, downtown Jerusalem, it's a holy site for everyone, right? And no one wants to attack, these ancient mosques and churches. So we haven't, from my understanding, got any significant strikes in Jerusalem just yet. But everyone is still very cautious, understandably so. And so they all go to the bomb shelters because in war, anything is possible.
The life goes on attitude that you talk about, and you spent a lot of time in Ukraine, and we've spoken to you about it there. They're facing a different kind of threat, certainly a much more capable threat in the Russians. But the idea of trying to just have some normalcy in life going on, what do you see as similarities or differences between the two countries?
Well, they're entirely similar, right? Where after a certain period, you have to get used to war and you just have to live. Because what is the alternative, right? You can't just cry for days or weeks on end. That's not a sustainable way of living. And so, and then on top of that, there's 2 other main factors is that you also have to have some sense of economic continuity, right? You can't just pause the entire country because it's at war. You need to have a functioning economy, which means that people go and do their jobs, right? And when you're doing your job and you're doing your regular work, that creates a sense of normalcy as well. It creates a schedule, creates continuity. And that absorbs the unreality of war. Things become banalized. And I think the best way that I've been able to explain this to Canadians is if you could take the April-May 2020 version of yourself and imagine that version of yourself explaining to the January 2020 version of yourself of, what it would be like during COVID and the lockdowns when the cities are empty and you can't touch anyone and, being within a meter of someone is a big faux pas. Your January version of you would say that's absurd. How can you live that way? But we all went through that. We all knew that within a few weeks, that was just your new normal and you just dealt with it. And Sorry, I mentioned there were two things. I mentioned economic continuity is one of them. But the second thing here is the psychological aspect, or rather psychological political aspect of it. For in Ukraine and in Israel, to allow yourself to be paralyzed with panic and fear is seen as a defeat for many people. It is seen as conceding to the enemy control over your emotional state. To live with some degree of normalcy, to find joy in your everyday life, to have your coffee, to see your friends, to go for a nice walk, is an act of defiance, and it shows that you will not have your life ruined by this country that wants to physically exterminate you. They can't exterminate you physically, and they're not going to exterminate you emotionally or psychologically. So there's a commonality between those two countries.
You think, too, what a difference it could make if Ukraine had something like the Iron Dome, if we had helped them build up something like that, if we were as determined to stop missiles from hitting Ukrainian population centers as we are, to stopping Iranian missiles from striking Israeli centers. That kind of support, kind of a difference could that make for Ukraine?
Well, it did make a difference. And I really want to emphasize that the West did provide significant anti-air defense systems to Ukraine. And as a result, the interception rate for the missiles that are sent in to Ukrainian cities is at around 80 or 90%, right? And thank God, because otherwise Kyiv, Odessa, Lviv, would be in a much worse state than they are today. The problem, though, is that it has not been communicated to Western voters how essential and life-changing these defenses have been. And so, for example, when Republicans were blockading aid to Ukraine for 6 months, from late 2023 till early to mid 2024, that had a discernible impact on what it meant to live in a Ukrainian city, because by the end of it, the Ukrainians were running out of air defenses and things were starting to hit more and more and more. Thankfully, the United States resumed its assistance before the air defenses completely ran out. But, you could see people feeling much more scared. And of course, when you have more panic and more fear, I think that tends to, of course, lead to an economic slowdown. Thankfully, we didn't get to a breakdown in Ukraine. What I would say is that if the United States treated Ukraine with the same seriousness that it treated Israel and believed in the importance of Ukraine's victory, and not just, giving Ukraine is just enough so they don't lose, I think we would be in a safer world, right? I'm irked by the double standards used between Ukraine and Israel. And one of the greatest examples of that is that Israel attacked Iran's nuclear facilities, and no one talked about how this is escalation, right? They all understood that this is a rational response to a major threat. Meanwhile, when Ukraine had Operation Spiderweb, which is that recent operation where they smuggled in a whole bunch of drones and destroyed approximately 20 to 30% of Russia's strategic bombing capacity, destroyed these planes that exist only to transport missiles to kill Ukrainian civilians in their cities. Some people on the right, some Republicans said that was an escalation, that was inappropriate. So there is that double standard where when the Ukrainians defend themselves, that is seen as provocative and escalatory, whereas when the Israelis defend themselves, that is seen as being, rational and justified.
Well, and of course, Iran helps Russia. Russia helps Iran. I don't know if that will kind of resonate finally now, maybe with some Republicans in the U.S. But yeah, once Donald Trump made an early departure from the G7 summit here in Alberta, look, there was clearly a lot of support for Israel and its right to defend itself, but we did see a lot of support as well for Ukraine and additional commitment from Canada. So what do you make of where the rest of the allies or the G7 countries are at here?
So what I would say is that it's important to understand that right now we have this new Cold War where we're facing off against an anti-Western axis of Russia, Iran, China, and North Korea. And these are powers that treat their military commitments very seriously, and they collaborate very effectively. And so we have to think of them as a block of opponents, and we have to holistically address their threat. Unfortunately, the West has been naive, we've been weak, and we haven't thought things out strategically. And we've tried to view these conflicts as being discrete. And that is a problem on both the left and the right. So right now, Trump is very pro-Israel and very, aggressive on Iran, but is inexplicably conciliatory towards Russia, right? Wants to be Putin's BFF. And that doesn't work because those two countries are in an alliance. They both want to dismantle Western hegemony. And when the Republicans don't look at this holistically and don't realize that you have to oppose Russia and Iran together, that's a problem. But conversely, in Canada, we have a liberal government that is very staunchly supportive of Ukraine. Thank God. I'm happy to see that. But they don't take the Iranian threat seriously. And so they'll talk about the importance of defending Ukrainian sovereignty, but somehow ignore the fact that the drones that are raining down on Ukrainian civilians are Shaheds. They were developed by Iran. They were exported by Iran to Russia before they landed in our cities and killed our people, right? And now, of course, Russia produces many of their drones, but based on Iranian technology. So I find the liberals, they're also strangely myopic. I never know how to pronounce that word.
Yes. Well, the folks know, again, you're posting dispatches on your X account. It's at Zivo Adam, Z-I-V-O, and more from you as well at nationalpost.com. Adam, be well, and thank you so much for making some time for us here. Really appreciate this.
Thanks for having me.
Right, once again, that is Adam Zivo, commentator, National Post columnist. He's also director of the Canadian Centre for Responsible Drug Policies. He's in Israel. You can follow his posts and updates on his X account at Zivo Adam. Coming up in a moment, we're going to talk about the ongoing debate around Alberta's coal policy and some significant developments in recent months. Alberta-based country singer-songwriter Corb Lund has found himself at the center of this debate. He's got a lot to say about it. We'll get to that conversation in just a second. You're listening to The Rob Breakenridge Show.
I'm going to boil it down to one thing. I'm going to send my 20 questions in and hope to get answers from you. But the UCP government in 2019 didn't have a mandate to open up the coal mines. The UCP government elected in 2023 didn't have a mandate to open up the coal mines. Could you commit to us as quickly as you did to the separatists that you would hold a referendum on coal mining in Alberta and abide by the results?
Welcome back. What you just heard there was from a recent town hall meeting in Fort Macleod concerning Alberta's coal policy, and specifically a decision to greenlight the Grassy Mountain project on Alberta's eastern slopes. The particular exchange you heard there, and that video, by the way, posted to social media by writer and researcher Trevor Scott Howell, involved former Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman, who was one of more than 500 in attendance at that meeting, most of whom were very much there to hold the government's feet to the fire. This is an issue that has really resonated, and not in a positive way, with folks in southern and rural Alberta who might otherwise be considered the UCP voter base. But some things are bigger than politics, like threats to the watershed, for example. The coal policy issue has been a hot-button issue for 5 years now, going back to May of 2020, when the Alberta government abruptly announced that they were scrapping the 1976 coal policy. Now, that policy was later reinstated, and some new restrictions did come into effect in 2022, but 4 so-called advanced proposals, including Grassy Mountain, were exempted. Back in 2021, the Alberta Energy Regulator had rejected Grassy Mountain, but last month the AER gave the Australian-based company behind the project the green light to proceed with coal exploration. Now, there is, of course, the expected push and pull in this debate over jobs and economic development versus protecting the environment. But possible water contamination is a big concern for the citizens and farmers and ranchers who rely on a safe water supply. Well, someone who has found himself at the forefront of this debate and was in attendance at that town hall meeting is Alberta singer-songwriter Corb Lund. CorbLund.com is his website. You can follow him on Facebook and X at Corb Lund, where he's been sharing his thoughts about this important issue. Corb, thanks so much for joining us here. Welcome to the program.
Thanks.
Let's take a step back, and you've been involved in this in I think for some 5 years now. Look, you've got some ranching background, runs deep in your family, but just how did you get involved in this issue in the first place?
Yeah, that's interesting. I always point out that it wasn't left-leaning eco-maniacs that got me into this. It was generational ranch families west of Nanton who were really, their places are being threatened by some of these mines. And, I'd sound like a broken record, but I always like to point out that I don't have a side here. I don't affiliate with any of the parties. I don't particularly like any of them. It has nothing to do with parties here or win or lose or tribalism. It's just about a bad idea for our water. And, also, I mean, I'm not anti-industry and I'm not anti-resource. It's just that every project has to be looked at on its own merits, and this one doesn't add up.
Now, yeah, this is a region where there's been a lot of coal mining over the years, and it has had an impact too. I mean, even as putting aside this project for a moment, we just had this report come out about levels of selenium in fish that were pulled from Crow's Nest Lake. So, yeah, there's a history of this industry there, but there are concerns even about what's already there.
Yeah, there are. That study in particular is interesting because there's a doctor, there's a government of Alberta scientist. He works for the government. His name is Dr. Colin Cook, and he's done 4 studies in the last few years, 2 of them on air quality and 2 of them on water quality in that area. And they're all damming of coal. And I've been to 2 town halls in the last few months, and Minister Schultz, in both cases, was crowing about these studies and how they supported coal. And a lot of us in Lethbridge a few months ago asked the government to send us these studies, and they did, to their credit. And we all read them and couldn't believe our eyes, because I don't know if Minister Schultz is ignorant of what's in them or is just so arrogant that she thinks we won't read them, but they're all really damning of coal. And more importantly, I know a whole bunch of media outlets, CTV, Global, the Globe and Mail, Canadian Press, CBC, have all tried to get Dr. Colin to interpret these studies, and the government won't give him permission to speak. And we pay his salary, we pay for the studies. And Rebecca Schultz replied a week ago, the quote was something like, well, he's a trained scientist, not a trained spokesperson. Well, to me, that says, I said this yesterday on Jesperson's show, but to me, all that says is, yeah, a trained scientist is going to stand up there and tell you the truth about what he found and interpret the studies for you, and a trained spokesman is going to spin it how they want to spin it. So that... Right. And not only that, sorry to rant, but this latest study is really damning too, because it says that the tissue of the fish, the trout in the Crow's Nest Lake, which is right near Tent Mountain, I believe. I have to check that, but I'm pretty sure it's Tent. One of the closed mines. The selenium content is so high in the fish tissue that the government issued a "Don't eat the fish" warning on an obscure website that hardly anybody heard about. And at that town hall meeting, they were asked about that study, and Schultz and Smith stood up there and said, "Oh, it's well below drinking water levels." And no one asked about drinking water levels, and the study wasn't about drinking water levels. It was a deliberate dodge, because the study is about the level of selenium in the fish tissue, which is so high that the government's warned people not to eat it. So to me, that seems negligent, I think, like, in my opinion, like this is health stuff now.
Well, no kidding. Well, let's talk about that town hall, because like I say, I think this, just the response, the pushback has helped thrust this issue back to the forefront. But it was remarkable to see the turnout. And as you alluded to, I mean, these are folks in Southern Alberta who might otherwise be, I think, kind of the UCP base. These are farmers, ranchers, landowners, rural folk. And there was a lot of passion. Just your thoughts, first of all, on all of that.
Yeah, it was a real mix of people. There were a lot of what I would guess are left-leaning people, but there are also a lot of hats there, a lot of cowboy hats and a lot of rural people. And this is one of the things that's baffling to me. Like, from a sheer, Machiavellian political standpoint, the UCP doesn't really care what the left 50% of the country or the province thinks, which is how it works. But they're eating into their own base, as far as I can tell. And the last election wasn't a landslide by any means. So they're starting to, this is an issue that's dividing the conservative base, because, there's some right-wing ideologues who will never listen to anything about anti-industry environmental threats. But there's a pretty good chunk, especially in the ag community, that are, myself, we have 4th generation land, and we've spent a lot of years trying to keep our water clean and our soil healthy and our grass healthy. And ag people think like that. So, I don't understand what the hell-bent motivation for the government is on these coal mines. I understand it from the coal companies. That's what they do. I get it. But I don't understand why this government is just so obsessed with putting these coal mines in when the polls say over and over 70% of Albertans don't want them.
So what you heard then at this public hearing or this public meeting, because there wasn't an opportunity for follow-up questions, right? So the Alberta government,
Right.
the premier, the cabinet ministers could give their answer, and then it had to go to the next question. So how did that skew what people were hearing?
Well, with no follow-up questions, it allows the people on stage to say whatever they want. I mean, there were a few follow-ups de facto by people further down in the line, which to their credit, but for the most part, you couldn't challenge their answers. And I don't know. Unfortunately, I've been in this coal thing longer than any of the people on stage, except for maybe Brian Jean. And I unfortunately know my stuff. I don't want to know it, but I know it. I've become educated about this. And they were telling, in my opinion, there was a whole bunch of untruths and disingenuous stuff coming off the stage. And it felt very much not like listening to the audience to form their decision making. It felt much more like a predetermined decision and explanations to try to support it, which I don't think is the purpose of a town hall, in my opinion.
Well, and the follow-up to what happened at that public meeting, so you've kind of issued a challenge of sorts to the premier or cabinet ministers to have a more open conversation, even maybe have a debate on this. And a couple of people you've been working with, and one is worth noting because of how much the government sort of defers to this coal committee. Tell us a bit more about Bill Trafford, who you've been working with.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. A few months ago, myself and a woman named Katie Morrison, who works for Canadian Parks and Wildlife, and like you said, the third person, most notably, Bill Trafford, who was on the government's own coal committee, have challenged Smith and Schultz and Jean to a public, long-form, moderated debate. Not a public town hall where it gets crazy, but something that can be viewed by the public. And, they spent a lot of oxygen at that Fort McLeod thing saying how, we've made all our decisions on coal based around our own coal committee findings. And Trafford himself was on that committee. He was one of 5. And he's one of the people that wants to debate them about this stuff because he thinks they're full of it too. And I don't want to speak for him, but that's paraphrasing, I would say.
So some of what the premier said and her cabinet ministers said in defending this decision, and part of it is this idea that we're almost legally obligated to go ahead with this, or these threats of a lawsuit from this company, that's got to factor into the government's decision. What do you make of that, first of all?
There's a few points about that. Number one, just about anybody knows that when a plaintiff sues somebody, you throw everything in the kitchen sink against the wall, and the number that you sue them for is hardly ever the number you get. It's a negotiation, essentially, right? Number two, they're basing it on, as far as I understand it, on lost profits, right? And I mean, they're big boys. This is the resource game. If you don't get approval, you don't get approval. If the government decides it's a bad idea, I actually support the idea of giving them whatever their input costs are back. That's probably fair. If the Kenney government went to Australia and promised them the moon, they should probably get their input costs back. But I don't know how many millions that would be. But this whole 14 billion figure seems ridiculous. And the third point, which I've thought about a lot, is if you think about how Danielle Smith typically reacts to challenges, for her to stand up there and just say, we're being sued for 14 billion. We'll just roll over. They're going to win. Like, when's the last time she ever didn't fight something like that? Like, that tells me alone that something funny is going on behind the scenes. I don't know what it is, but it doesn't seem like she's the kind of person who would not fight a foreign company if she wasn't in favor of what they're after, based on everything else I've seen her do.
Right. And even the decision itself that allows this project to go forward, and the claims in that decision about how this won't necessarily generate much in the way of selenium, that this is not connected directly to waterways. They've got this pit lake that they have access to, that somehow that alleviates these concerns. How much faith or stock should we put in that?
Zero. They're a coal company, and they want the coal and they want the money, and that's all they care about. And they'll say anything they have to say to get it. In my opinion, I don't want to be sued, so I'll say in my opinion. But that's what's going on. They'll just say anything they got to say, in my opinion, to get into the coal mines or to get into those hills and take out the coal. Another pertinent point is there's an expert coal engineer named, it's hard to pronounce, he's Dutch. His name is Cornelius Colleen, I think I'm getting it right. He's spent 40 years as a coal engineer on 6 continents. He was the guy, he was interviewed yesterday. He's been interviewed a couple of times. But he has personally worked for Teck when they analyzed the coal in the Grassy Mountain area, and he says it's not good metallurgical coal. And he's a 40-year lifetime global expert. And he said the Japanese came to the same conclusion in the 70s. I asked him, I had a big long talk with him. I said, what is the quality of the coal for making steel in the Elk Valley in BC? And he says it's 8 to 10 out of 10. And I said, what is ours in Grassy in the Eastern Slopes? And he said it was mostly 3 to 4 out of 10 quality and a little bit of 6 to 7. And in his opinion, which he stated yesterday in an interview, is that the idea that Northback has is to go in and mine the more rich seams for a couple of years and make it look like it's a productive mine and then sell it to what they call an unsophisticated investor. So if that's true, not only are we, like, I wouldn't be in favor of this even if it was economically beneficial because we're going to have to pay for the cleanup anyway, but it isn't economically viable, not only because it's going to screw up tourism jobs and ag jobs in the middle of an 8-year drought. Apparently, according to this expert, and I would have to look into this because this is relatively new to me, but according to him, the Japanese companies who looked into it a few decades ago, the coal isn't there. So what the hell are we doing? And who's getting paid and why and what's going on?
Well, it's an interesting point. And again, it's worth noting that, yes, I mean, there is active mining and operations that are occurring on the western side of the mountains there in the Elk Valley or the Elk River region, but when we're talking about the eastern slopes and what this project would involve, it's important to distinguish the two, right? It's not enough to say, well, it goes on there, so it's fine to do it here.
Well, I assumed that. I assumed it was the same seam because it's so close, but he says it's not true.
Yeah. On the economic side, and we did see there was this vote that took place in Crow's Nest Pass, and there's support in the community, I guess, for this project, and understandably so. They've had economic challenges. There's the potential of jobs associated with this project. But as you alluded to, I mean, we need to frame that in a broader context, don't we?
Yeah. The referendum they had was, I mean, I don't want to be too negative, but it was kind of a stunt. It was a dog and pony show because, number one, the mine site is not located in the Crow's Nest Pass municipality. The jobs are because the people that live there want to go work there. But the mine site itself is located in Ranchlands MD, the next county over, and their county councilors had a vote on it and unanimously rejected it. They don't want any part of it in their county. And thirdly, it doesn't account for the 200,000 people downstream users, a lot of them in the ag business. And I don't know, I mentioned this, but we're in, I think, year number 8 of a brutal drought. And if you ask anybody in ag, we are in a drought. And there's no extra water, A, to use for coal mining, or B, to contaminate. And so that to try to stand on, and Smith has done this a number of times, to stand up there and say that democracy is spoken, it's just silly. It's silly and juvenile and transparent because the only people they asked were permanent residents in the Crow's Nest Pass who were I think it amounted to 1,500 people. So they're going to decide on the fate of a mine that's not in their municipality and for the downstream users. Come on.
Right. So where does this leave coal policy in Alberta? Because we have a ban on open pit mining, and I guess this project's kind of being grandfathered in or an exception. So where are we now moving forward here?
I don't know. It's tough. I mean, I feel like it's hard. Part of the strategy, I think, on the part of the government and the coal companies is to grind people down because we have jobs and hockey practice and we don't have time to spend all our time on coal. So they just keep coming and coming and coming. And one of the most frustrating things is Grassy Mountain was turned down by the provincial AER and the federal joint review panel. And Northback or Benga appealed it 3 times, lost the appeals. It was a completely dead project. So how many times do Albertans have to fight the same mine and over and over and over? And also, the science aside and the economics aside, both valid points, but take those off the table. No matter what it is, if 70% of the province doesn't want coal mines, even for aesthetic reasons, do it. You guys work for us. You are employees. People don't want it. Listen to your employers. I'm speaking to the premier and the ministers. They work for us.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's interesting you mention aesthetic reasons. The same Alberta government that doesn't want windmills close to mountains really just for aesthetic reasons. So there are certainly some double standards when it comes to what kind of development they're happy with.
Yeah, I've never been involved in anything political in my entire 35-year career in music. I've deliberately stayed out of it. But my 5 years in this has been so deflating to my opinion of people in government, and not just the UCP, all of them. It's just that the whole thing is just, and in this particular case, this group of people is just full of it. Like they'll just say anything they got to say, and they just count on a cloud of information and people being busy and not having time to research it. But I've dug my heels in and put in my time and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours, and in my opinion, they're full of shit. They're just doing it for, I don't know why they're doing it. I don't know. We can speculate on why they're doing it, I guess.
Yeah, but it is interesting because I think if they were really, truly bullish about this, like they would be out there touting this and bragging about this and saying, look what we've done, look what we've approved. Like it's pretty clear they just kind of want this to go away, to be quiet, to not have to talk about it. So I do wonder maybe if this town hall was a bit of a wake-up call that people are following this, people are upset about this, they're not going to be able to make this quietly go away. Do you think there's anything to that?
I would hope so, but I'm also shocked by the lack of the shame gene with these people. Like there's just no sense of honor or personal shame about being dishonest. I hope so. I hope so. I don't know. When you look at motivations for this, when the ecology and the water angle doesn't add up, and it's a handful of jobs and the economics add up, I will say this: our former environment minister, Robin Campbell, went very shortly from his job as our environment minister to be the head coal lobbyist for the Coal Association of Canada. I'll also say that our premier, Kenny, who got us into this mess, is now on the board, I believe, of Bennett Jones, which is a large law firm that represents the coal companies, the foreign companies, against the people of Alberta. So I'm not saying there's corruption. I'm not saying there's anything illegal, but it sure seems greasy to me. And when I look, I don't know. I'm not. That's all I'll say about that.
No, fair enough. Well, we'll see where this all goes from here. I don't think this issue is going away. As mentioned, you've been posting about this. You're on Facebook, X, at Corb Lund, and of course, corblund.com. And you're still busy with your other job. You got some summer dates coming up, including some here in Alberta. Much more is mentioned, corblund.com. Corb, thanks so much for making some time for us. Really appreciate your perspective on this.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate it.
All right. Once again, that is Alberta-based country singer-songwriter Corb Lund. His website, corblund.com. And as we mentioned, he does have some tour dates coming up this summer, including some here in Alberta. Details at the website. You can follow him on Facebook and on X at Corb Lund. And as we noted as well, he's been sharing his thoughts about this issue. We'll see where it all goes from here. Coming up in just a moment, we're going to talk about an interesting story related to the big G7 summit that just wrapped up earlier this week in Kananaskis. With all those leaders there, of course, they need to be fed. So someone who was brought in to help out with that is Graham Sherman. He owns Calgary-based Tool Shed Beer and Barbecue. And in particular on the barbecue side, he's been making quite a name for himself in recent years with some big competition victories. So he was brought in to help feed the leaders at this G7 summit. Quite an experience, as you might imagine, and he's got a story to tell. We'll hear that story coming up shortly. You're listening to The Rob Breakenridge Show. Well, of course, the G7 summit has just wrapped up in Kananaskis as world leaders converged in this beautiful part of Alberta. But a real cool aspect of the story I wanted to share with you, someone who was invited to come cook barbecue for the G7 leaders. It's been a whirlwind few days for Graham Sherman, who is the owner of Tool Shed Beer and Barbecue in Calgary. ToolShedBrewing.com is the website. Graham, thanks so much for making some time for us here.
Yeah, thanks for having me as always, my friend.
It's a pretty crazy story, and I'm sure it's been a week you'll never forget. Yeah. Let's take a step back. How did this all come about in the first place?
Well, it's kind of a culmination of all the crazy, steps along the way in my journey. I mean, I used to work in Afghanistan for government and military clients, so I maintained a security clearance back then. And coming back home and starting Tool Shed, I've established great friendships and relationships with amazing customers such as the Kananaskis Golf and Country Club and the Pomeroy. And, the golf course out in Kananaskis is our number one account. They're absolutely phenomenal. They're family to us. So every year when I go out to do a product knowledge for the new team that are going to be, running food and beverage on that golf course, I bring all my barbecues. I cook for them. It's just something that I do for a team that has done so much for us throughout, the pandemic and throughout the last couple of years, serving our products as much as they do. So I think the last thing is as you know, buddy, the last couple of years have been very good to us in the barbecue competition circuit. We've got a few world championship titles at the biggest competitions on the planet. And that's pretty humbling, but pretty darn awesome as well. So, I mean, yeah, when they get together and start saying we want to have a meal that's a little less formal and a little more open and has people kind of in that back courtyard of the Pomeroy, like barbecue. My dear friend Darren Robinson, who's the general manager at the Kananaskis golf course, just said there's only one guy, and that's how it started. Global Affairs reached out to me and said we have to come, we have to meet you, we have to try the barbecue, and it went from there to wow, we got to take on this amazing experience.
Oh, that's crazy. So when did you get out there?
I got out there last Wednesday. Was it Wednesday? The 12th, whatever day the 12th was. The 12th to the 18th was my time. In the green zone, locked in there. It was amazing getting through I think there was 7 security check stops down that highway to get onto site, and you have to drive through X-ray machines and get out of your car. There's 4 security, like police officers going through your car, dogs sniffing it. It was wild. And like I said, I've lived in a war zone for a long time and worked on really big contracts for, government agencies and military units all throughout NATO. I've never seen anything so impressive in my life than the organization, the security, just all the details on how you could possibly put on an event like this with all the world's leaders. And just to look around, it seems like you're in a movie. It just didn't seem real. Everything that went into it.
Yeah, it's a unique location, isn't it? Because it's so isolated. There's really just the one highway that goes right through there, so they can keep that all pretty secure. But they're not messing around there, are they?
That's secure for people. One of their biggest threats was grizzly bears. Some of those fences, I thought, they'll have a hard time. Bad guys will have a hard time climbing over those fences. But it was grizzly bears for all the police or RCMP or military, personnel that are out in the woods protecting that hotel. There's a lot of deadly wildlife out there, right? So there was a lot of encounters they had with bears.
I saw that.
Yeah.
So it was you and your son then going to cook barbecue.
Yes, and what an experience! And of course, I think you've met my son. It's not just like my little guy coming to tag along. He's a he's a culinary ninja in his own right. He's going through the SAIT culinary program, and he works at some really high end restaurants in town here. So, and our last world championship title was based on a dish that he created. So, I mean, he's a monster, culinary wise, and so. Man, there's nothing better than sharing this moment with your son. And, at one point along the way, he made the comment, and this is just a perspective thing, but he's like, Dad, all of these, police and all of these people like asked to be a part of this event. He said, I love the thought that when our country wants to show off to the rest of the world, they brought us into barbecue.
Right. Exactly.
What a cool moment with your son, right?
Yeah. So was it up to you to kind of come up with something, or was it a list of this is what we need, or this is what the leaders want, or how was that handled?
Yeah, it was a collaboration with the amazing culinary team at the Pomeroy. So the executive chef there and of course Global Affairs, sitting down and discussing, what we would like to do and what would cover all the bases. So it wasn't just, I'm really good with brisket. It was absolutely we're cooking brisket, but also pork ribs will be a station, and then there'll be, chicken. We have our Alabama white sauce chicken. We have this salmon dish. A good friend of mine in Regina, Rob Reinhardt, is another world champion barbecuer, and he allowed us to use his recipe for a maple chipotle salmon. And then we did a vegetarian gluten-free dish as well, a jackfruit, smoked jackfruit. It was kind of like pulled pork on a tostada. And so we kind of covered all the bases, we think. We had 5 stations, and any of the leaders and delegates could just kind of walk through the back area with their plate and try some brisket, try some ribs, try some chicken. It was it was a lot, boy, for just me and my son to coordinate all those barbecues, try to get things arranged with the hotel staff. And of course, I'm sure you'd understand too, with something of this nature, I can't just bring my barbecues in, leave them there and roll. The leaders are coming in and out. And so they hold everything off and then they say, okay, at 5 p.m., get those barbecues in. You have 2 minutes, get them in, go, go, go. And then dinner has to be served at 6, not 1 minute later. And I'm thinking, it takes an hour to start the fires. So okay, start the fires now. We're going to have to push hot barbecues into place. And it was one of the most insane things I've ever pulled off. But we did it. We got her done. It was something like 300 people, running through there, eating all that barbecue. And there was a lot of barbecue we had to cook. 16 briskets and 200 racks of ribs. And it was a ton.
And just, I mean, even once you're in, like you've gone through the layers of security to get there, like there's still like, even just like you're cooking for these leaders, including, of course, the U.S. president. Yeah. So what goes into, I don't know, like watching what you're doing or the food itself? How is that handled?
It's pretty wild. Once you're in, it's kind of neat. It's I would compare this to, when I lived in Afghanistan. You're on this military base, Kandahar airfield, for example. And when there's somebody else on that base, it's kind of like you're expected to be there, so you could talk to anybody. And like Lanny McDonald came one time to play hockey against the troops. And if you had seen Lanny at Chinook, it said, "Oh, hey, Lanny McDonald," he'd be like, "Oh, hi." But but you see him on this military base. You're both supposed to be there, and it's like Lanny, and he's like, "Oh, you're from Calgary." And there's a different level of comfort with bumping into people that is just you're familiar. And the example I would give is we'd be walking down the main path, and that our barbecues were right on this main path. So all the leaders would walk by every day, back and forth in front of our barbecues, and stop and have a chat. And holy crow, that smells great. And my son had all these moments of perspective where he'd say, anywhere else in the world that we would be, if we saw any world leader, it would be, oh my goodness. But it was just so common throughout this last week. It was, you'd look over and say, oh, there's the prime minister of, or even better, somebody would come and take a picture and we didn't know who they were. And so I'd say, oh, take a picture with my phone too. And then, hey, buddy, go look this person up, see who it is. And he'd say, whoa, Dad, that's the council president of the EU. Right. So there was a lot of just comfort with that type of person, just kind of walking around all the time. But then when it came to cooking for the leaders, especially, of course, for Donald Trump, it was a whole different thing. So in the kitchen, there was some mandatory foods to have on hand at all time. And there was a list of things that at any minute he'll want, and we have to have them ready. And so one of those was shrimp cocktail and a bowl of ice cream and spaghetti with meatballs. And so when the order would come in, the president wants a shrimp cocktail and a bowl of ice cream. Those two seem to go together often. Sure. There'd be this 17-year veteran of the Navy who is responsible for watching every piece of food that lands at the president's table. And he stands over you and watches every single thing that happens and says, please change your gloves again. Please wash your hands first, put on another set of gloves. And then over this shoulder is this Navy, veteran. And then over this shoulder is Health Canada doing the same thing. And they want two, portions of everything being cooked for him so that they can test it and make sure there's no, bacteria or worse. Right. And they're probing for temperature. And you're looking around trying to get, a shrimp cocktail put together. And there's this scrutiny over the food. That's I guess it's not a surprise at all, but it was just unbelievable to witness what goes into a bowl of ice cream going up to the president.
No kidding. Well, I was reading, the Secret Service is there to keep them safe, but they got to eat too. And you had some fans in the Secret Service.
Yes. And that was one of the most unbelievable things. Like you have these moments where, I've had them here at Tool Shed as well, where I stop for a second and look around at what's going on. And you're just, you're in your life doing your thing, climbing the ladder or pushing or striving or whatever you want to call it. And if you don't stop for a minute and say, where am I right now? Like, wow, this is amazing. Like, just to take a breath of air and enjoy where you are. I had a few of those moments, this week, and one of them was with the Secret Service. It was 4 a.m, and I'm about to try some ribs, and I was making friends with a lot of the police and the security details, but also some enemies because they kept smelling the barbecue, going, when do we get to try? And unfortunately, they didn't get to eat the barbecue. It wasn't for the guards to support the security. And so I felt so bad that they had to smell it all day. There was guards all over posted, in my area, and they never got to try the barbecue. So at 4 a.m, I opened up the pit. I took out a rack to sample. I cut them, and like that, this gentleman's standing right there, and he's like, "What are you doing? What's going on here?" And I'm like, "Oh, I just got to try these ribs." And the conversation was along the lines of, "Yeah, I know what you're doing. I've been watching you for days and waiting for my chance to try some of this." So, I've got just a cigar in my hand, sitting there barbecuing at the G7 and sharing ribs with the Secret Service is it's just something that I still can't quite comprehend. And they were such fans of it. They the next day during the big meal, one of the gentlemen came over and said, "I'm from Texas, and that's the best brisket I've ever had." And he gave me this amazing challenge coin from his security detail, and it's what an honor, right? Like, those things are really, really important from police and military units. They don't give them out just to anybody, and I got one for brisket. So that's pretty darn cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Were they serving beer at all during any of this? Did they manage to get any of the tool shed product? Were they drinking any beer at the summit?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. At each of these stations for the barbecue, there was also a sampling of beer. So anybody that was at this event could come around and try different beers from Alberta. They had a bunch of different cool brands. Grizzly Paw was also there, and Toolshed beers were well represented as well. So nice. Pretty neat. Our non-alcoholic beer was a big hit. So Zero People Skills and Zero Red Rage were a tremendous hit. Not everybody can drink, especially when they're working and there's a task at hand that's important. So I think bringing the non-alcoholic beers were a big hit.
Yeah, and I mean, just as an aside, it's interesting what the market that's become, and I did want to touch on that because I know you've been developing some of these products where it's a real focus on the craft beer experience, but the zero alcohol. There's a lot more demand for that these days. Isn't
My goodness! This has been my obsession for years. It's been years that we've been developing the way that we do it. We do it differently, of course, from most people. We don't make a product that tastes like beer, but it's not alcohol. We take our actual award-winning beers and we de-alcoholize them. So we have, for all extensive purposes, it's kind of like a reverse osmosis, and we push our finished product through it, and it de-alcoholizes it, and we're left with this, one tank full of alcohol water, colorless, flavorless, odorless alcohol water that we can make, hard iced teas or whatever, lemonades, and then the rest is like a concentration, almost like a little bullion cube of People Skills or Red Rage, and we rehydrate that, and now we have a full batch of our non-alcoholic. And one of my goals on this trip was to try to get a picture of the President of the United States holding a can of Zero People Skills, our non-alcoholic. But I was unsuccessful. Yeah, I think he's got handlers that would never allow that to happen. So, yeah.
So you're back home now, back to the real world. But I would imagine there's some spillover from this. Just meeting all these people, making all these new connections. Like, I don't know if the president's going to be showing up at the tap house anytime soon. But what do you hope comes of it?
Well, yeah, you're right. And one of the things that's just such an honor is to be able to serve, in our way. Like, I've spent a lot of years. I know I was put on this planet for service. That's why I left my government military job and started a craft brewery. I just love serving. I want to host. I want to bring great people together and share great moments, with great folks, sharing great stories over great food and great drink. That's why I'm on this planet. So whenever I get a chance to do that, at this level, holy smokes, it's pretty awesome. So I would say that coming away from something like this and having the government of Canada acknowledging, that we do what we do, the way that we do it at this level, is one of the greatest things I could ever ask for. And so, of course, we're getting inundated now with a lot of the the military and the police and RCMP units that are heading back home to Ottawa or Montreal. They're coming through the brewery on their way home to finally try the barbecue since they didn't get it out in Kananaskis. And then some of the leaders as well. Prime Minister Mark Carney was hopeful to get some more barbecue for his the final Oilers watch party he had, but unfortunately he's got his team that was like, we already have plans. Yeah. And so maybe if he had some barbecue, we would have won. But other than that, Prime Minister Macron, his team, the service team, were so in love with it. He's got this amazing gentleman. I think it's the private service. He's like a butler, and he's in charge of everything at the Palace d'Elysée or whatever. It's kind of like the White House of the French Prime Minister. And he gave me his personal card and this amazing, it's like a little medal from the palace, and said, we need you to get you to France. We need you to cook for the Prime Minister again. He loved it. This is so great. And, coming away from an event like this with offers to go to other countries and cook for world leaders because they enjoyed the barbecue or the beer, it seems like a dream. It doesn't seem like real life.
And a great showcase, as we mentioned. I mean, what's your sense of what, just in terms of the craft beer industry in Alberta? I mean, just really tough times through the pandemic. Now for everyone to kind of get their footing, get back in the groove of things. I know right now with tariffs and there's all of that. Still, maybe a hope that we can open things up within Canada. But where are things at right now in your view?
Well, it was hard, boy. We almost lost everything during the pandemic as well. It was a razor's edge on if we would make it or not. And I think like now that we've come out of it and gotten through that, we're having the best year we've ever had in Toolshed. So it's there's still some, I think, some of the whiplash effect where, holy crap, the industry just got started. All these breweries come up, and then the reverse of that whiplash is, yikes, there's a lot of breweries that are huge. And then the pandemic shutting the whole world down. This has been tumultuous, to say the least. I think that one of the things that's defined Toolshed is I'm like a cockroach. You have to find a way to survive. And we've prided ourselves on is sometimes it takes a last second 3-point buzzer beater, and other times it takes incredible strategy and entrepreneurial disruptive thinking, but you just don't stop. You got to figure it out. And we're getting into a better time now. And I think it's just really perspective. Like whatever happens is going to happen. I didn't expect the pandemic, but we figured it out. So now that the story is tariffs, well, you got to have a different perspective on that as well. So every time I get interviewed about the tariffs, I go, oh, thank goodness for the tariffs. At long last, I had a reason to really sharpen my pencil and focus a little bit more longer term on cash flow and supply chain, because I can't buy from the States anymore. So I don't save cash flow by buying one pallet of aluminum cans at a time. I need to buy a full sea can from China, and that's a lot more money. It takes a lot more time for shipping, but it actually lowers my cost of goods going into my product. So if I could be a little better with cash flow, forecast a bit further down the road, plan for, the obvious need for cans in a better way, well, this is actually a benefit to my business. So, and the other side of it is, the premiers are actually talking about breaking down these interprovincial barriers. So this is a positive. I think we actually needed a catalyst this significant to really get them to the table. And it's not over yet. It's still a very poignant, discussion on all of their plates. And so I want to promote that and push that and support those conversations so we can make this country a little bit more free-flowing between provinces, right? So I think... Yeah. I mean, you could argue both ways. I'm an eternal optimist, maybe, but we're pushing for it as best we can, for sure.
Absolutely. Well, what a week it's been for you. Much more, of course, as mentioned, toolshedbrewing.com. Great beer, great barbecue, and a great experience for you, Graham Sherman. Thanks so much for joining us here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Hope to see you back at the brewery soon.
Okay, there you go. That is Graham Sherman, owner of Toolshed Beer and Barbecue in Calgary. Toolshedbrewing.com is their website. Check them out. You can also check out the tap room in Northeast Calgary. They're doing some great stuff, and quite an amazing experience for him this past week. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of the Rob Breakenridge Show. Our thanks again as well to Adam Zivo and Corb Lund. We will have another episode for you coming up on Tuesday. Of course, you can find us at our Substack page. robbreakenridge.ca is the website. You can find this podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and elsewhere. We've also got a YouTube channel as well. You can check that out on YouTube at Rob Breakenridge Show. Have yourselves a fantastic weekend, folks. We'll be back on Tuesday with a new episode. We'll talk to you then. Take care.